So this video is for free-to-play players, light spenders, and whales who are trying to decide if summoning for Varka is actually smart for their account. We're going to go over his pros, his cons, his team flexibility, his investment value, and whether he's worth it at C0 with R1 or at high constellations. But before we start, let me say something really important. You need to define your own goals, your budget, your execution level, and whether you're willing to learn his mechanics while drastically change the conclusion. If I say he can't clear Fearless, but your goal isn't difficulty 5 and you're only aiming for difficulty 3 Stygian, that's completely different. So take all this with information and make your own personal judgment. Let's start with teams and versatility. Double Pyro is clearly his strongest and most consistent setup. His alternative teams are around 15-30% weaker, which heavily impacts team building decisions. However, the fact that Varka can flex into different infusions makes him a very versatile DPS. Even with his teams are quote-unquote worse, they're still viable depending on your goals. For example, Double Cryo into SSAO, which requires Cryo, has already been tested at C0R0. Varka can clear Fearless and below. However, the damage is not high enough to clear Dire. That tells us something important. His alternative teams are functionally just not optimal at the absolute highest level. If you're not pushing top tier Dire content, those teams are still real options. Now let's talk about Varka Binefa, because a lot of people are calling it his best team, and I disagree. Endgame content usually favors 3 categories: lunar reactions, XRI setups, and rerun mechanics. That means you don't want to build 3 lunar teams or 3 non-lunar teams. The healthiest structure for an account is one with Hexerite team, 1 lunar team, and 1 generalist team that doesn't overlap too much. Using Varka and Binefa with Sucrose can achieve similar damage, makes Varka feel like a luxury slot. Yes, Binefa is about 5 to 10k DPS stronger at C0R0, but that gap shrinks if you invest into Varka. At higher investment, his Venti Durin core actually scales better. So instead of focusing on Binefa, I think it's smarter to focus on teams that revolve around maximizing Varka himself. Now, let's talk about Venti and Durin. Venti is replaceable in most content. However, Mandragola is a specific scenario where both Venti and Varka are heavily favored. That stage requires strong grouping and strong AoE damage. Venti can't clear Dire there without Varka, and Varka can't clear Dire without Venti. The damage requirement is simply too high, and if enemies spread, you lose too much time. But here's the key. If you don't care about Fearless or Dire, you don't need Venti. In Fearless, alternatives exist. They're just more frustrating to execute. Now, let's address interruption resistance. Varka's IR is 0.5. It's not good. Most players will want a shield. Replacing Venti with Lanyan is about a 10% damage loss and gives you survivability. Replacing Durin with Toma is close to a 20% loss, which is significantly more impactful. This is why Durin feels more essential than Venti in the pyro-focused Varka teams. As for Venti alternatives, you have options. Arazon is strong but Constellation reliant. Sucrose is excellent for grouping, especially against Mandragola, and only about 5% behind Venti while also enabling fall damage, and TTDS buffs. Kazuha offers decent grouping but struggles to maintain it after his skill. Lanyan provides shielding and buffs without heavy Constellation reliance. Aoife is cheap and functional but lacks grouping and can be interrupted easily. Jean at C0 doesn't add much since Bennett already heals, but with Constellations, she becomes more useful. They're all playable. Choose based off your account and comfort level. Durin alternatives exist too. Malwika works but may be stronger elsewhere. Chungling is fine but doesn't add anything special. Toma gives shielding but costs noticeable damage. Overall, Durin is more important than Venti for maximizing Varka's pyro teams. Now, let's talk about investment, because this is where free-to-play, light spenders, and whales really need to pay attention. Varka's signature weapon is his biggest upgrade. It's around a 23% increase over Serpent Spine R1 at 3 stacks. The attack speed bonus only speeds up combos by about 0.2 to 0.6 seconds, effectively giving you about 1 extra normal attack without exceeding rotation time. Even at 0 stacks, Serpent Spine still outperforms Black Cliff. Talking Stick is roughly similar to Black Cliff, and compared to team weapons, his signature is his best R1 investment for Varka teams. Durin's weapon only adds around 8 to 10% team damage because Varka already gives a lot of attack from Bennett, Hexerai sets, and Noblesse. Now, for Constellations, C1 gives 1 extra use when entering his form, but the buff only applies to the first E or CA. It's mid. It's not bad, not insane. C2 converts animo damage and isn't considered a specific infused damage type, which limits synergy. C3 buffs all talent damage and is solid. C4 is average. C5 is essentially useless because you don't want to burst. C6 is extremely strong, doubling special use from 3 to 6, but it does not increase interruption resistance. R1 is better than C1. C1 R1 is better than C2 R0. That alone shows how powerful his signature weapon is. I would not recommend pulling C1 over R1 unless you already have a top tier 5-star weapon like Blazing Suns. For C2 investments, both Varka and Durin C2 are strong. Durin's Constellations give team-wide bonuses and quills, which Varka benefits from heavily due to his low motion values. At C2, Farozan becomes much stronger because Varka deals more animo damage, making her competitive with Venti if grouping isn't required. Now, let's touch on artifacts. At C0, because his normal attacks and charge attacks are treated separately, sets like Shimenawa and Desert Pavilion are viable. However, Shimenawa only lasts 10 seconds. Slow combos ruin it. Pavilion requires a charged attack opener, which can affect rotation timing. Pyro Damage Goblet is technically best, but only about 75% of his damage is Pyro. That's why attack percent goblets are extremely competitive and often safer. At C2, since he deals more animo damage, attack goblet becomes more viable. In most cases, use the goblet with better substats. Burst usage is never optimal for damage. It looks beautiful, but I know people will use it anyways. But if you burst every 2 rotations, you don't need ER. If you burst every rotation, your ER requirements become very high. Now, let's talk about combos. The standard tested combo is N5, CA, N4, CA, and N2. It's easy, flexible, and practical. Dash cancel combos are a DPS loss unless executed perfectly. Special CA and Special E take roughly the same time. E feels smoother, but CA can be better in Shimenawa setups. With Venti, Durin, and Bennett, your setup time is about 7.5 seconds. Most optimal field time combos range between 10 to 12 seconds. Staying longer is not worth it because your buffs expire. So, is pulling Varka smart? If you're free to play, he's strong at C0, but requires proper teammates and execution. If you're missing Durin, your ceiling DPS drops significantly. Only pull if you like his gameplay and are ready to manage his lower interruption resistance. If you're a light spender, R1 is his best investment. It's more impactful than C1 and gives immediate value. If you're a whale, C6 is a massive spike, but even then, poor team building and rotation management will hold him back. Varka is powerful, scalable, and versatile, but he rewards planning and investment. Define your goals first, then decide if summoning for him aligns with your account.